Good luck to both of you. Let's touch gloves.
Unbelievable. Actually,
They got more than their money's worth. There's the bell. It ends in a hug.
He was the undisputed king of two-weight classes, a man who stood toe-to-toe with the most feared fighters of a generation and never, ever backed down. He had a video game bearing his name, a fleet of luxury sports cars, and a 54,000-square-foot mansion that was more like a palace. Over his historic, 3-decade-long career, he earned a staggering $230 million. But today, the championship belts are silent. The cars have been repossessed, and the mansion has been sold off at auction to pay his debts. The entire fortune, every last dime of it, has vanished into thin air. This is not just the story of a boxing champion. This is the tragic tale of Evander "the real deal" Holyfield, and how the relentless heart that made him an icon inside the ring was also the very thing that left him bankrupt and broken outside of it. His journey began a world away from the glittering Las Vegas Strip and the roaring crowds. Born in 1962 in Atmore, Alabama, he was raised by a single mother, Annie Laura Holyfield. The family struggled to get by, eventually moving to the crime-ridden, poverty-stricken Bowen Homes housing projects in Atlanta, Georgia, in search of work and a better life. It was a place where dreams were often suffocated by the harsh realities of violence and deprivation. But for a shy, quiet young Evander, a single chance encounter would change the entire trajectory of his life forever. At just 8 years old, he met an elderly youth coach named Miss Morgan. She saw a fire in the boy that others missed. "Do you know you could be like Muhammad Ali?" she asked him, her eyes seeing a future he couldn't yet imagine. The young Holyfield, baffled by the comparison, could only reply, "I'm only 8 years old." Her response was a prophecy that would define his existence. "You won't always be." With that, she pushed him towards the boxing gym, giving him not just a sport, but a weapon and a shield to defend himself against the streets. He was a natural from the very beginning, a phenom who stormed through the amateur ranks with a terrifying, almost unnatural knockout streak. His talent was raw but potent, a combination of speed, power, and a ferocious will to win. This raw ability earned him a coveted spot on the 1984 U.S. Olympic boxing team, a squad now widely regarded as the greatest ever assembled, featuring future legends like Meldrick Taylor, Pernell Whitaker, and Mark Breland. Holyfield was dominant in the lead-up, knocking out every single opponent he faced on his path to what seemed like an inevitable gold medal. But in the semifinals against Kevin Barry of New Zealand, disaster struck in the most controversial way possible. Holyfield landed a devastating, picture-perfect combination that sent Barry crumpling to the canvas, but in a moment that would haunt him for years. The referee ruled he had punched on the brake. The disqualification was swift, shocking, and universally condemned. Evander Holyfield, the man who had physically dominated everyone in his path, had been robbed of his chance at Olympic gold not by a superior fighter, but by a questionable officiating call. The International Olympic Committee virtually admitted the unfairness, later awarding him a bronze medal. But the stain of the robbery would forever be a part of his story, a narrative of injustice that he would carry with him into the professional ranks. That Olympic controversy, however, paradoxically made him a mainstream star before he ever threw a professional punch. The American public felt he was wronged, and they rallied behind the soft-spoken young man from Atlanta. His highly anticipated professional debut later that year was a showcase of the power, precision, and relentless pressure that would come to define his career. But with that immediate fame and marketability came immediate and grave danger. The boxing world of the 1980s was a jungle, filled with financial vultures and manipulative promoters. And a young, clean-cut, and incredibly marketable star like Holyfield was fresh meat. He would later reflect on this period with bitter clarity, stating, "You don't have other bodies looking out for you. Everybody's just stealing, man. They're just stealing silly." He had, by his own admission, trusted the wrong people from the very beginning. a pattern of financial betrayal and naivete that would snowball and ultimately haunt him for the rest of his life. Despite the sharks circling his future earnings, his rise in the ring was nothing short of meteoric. He quickly demonstrated that he wasn't just a brawler. He was a student of the game, a technician. He used a blistering jab, relentless body work, and astonishing hand speed to systematically break his opponents down. In just under 2 years, with a perfect record of 11-0, he earned a shot at the WBA cruiserweight title against a man known as the Camden Buzzsaw, Dwight Muhammad Qawi. Qawi was a ferocious, hardened puncher with a granite chin, and virtually no one in the boxing world gave the young, relatively inexperienced Holyfield a chance. What ensued was a 15-round war of attrition, a brutal, bloody, back-and-forth brawl that tested the soul, stamina, and heart of the 24-year-old contender. Holyfield would later call it the single toughest fight of his entire life. He threw over 1,200 punches, a superhuman output that showcased his incredible conditioning, and emerged victorious by a narrow decision, his hand raised as a world champion for the very first time. He had been baptized by fire, and he was now ready to conquer the world. With the taste of championship gold, Holyfield became a man possessed. He was no longer just fighting for glory. He was building a legacy. He immediately set his sights on unifying the entire cruiserweight division, a feat that had never been accomplished before. He defended his title with a vicious third-round knockout of Henry Tillman, a former Olympic teammate, dropping him 4 times in a display of sheer dominance. But Holyfield and his team knew that to compete at the highest level, they needed an edge. They embarked on a revolutionary training regimen dubbed Project Omega. This wasn't the old-school road work and heavy bag routine. This was a futuristic, high-tech program that incorporated specialized weightlifting and cutting-edge equipment to add solid muscle mass without sacrificing his legendary speed or endurance. He was transforming his body, pushing the limits of sports science, and the results were terrifying for his opponents. The mission to become the undisputed cruiserweight king led him to Ricky Parkey, the IBF champion. The fight was not a contest, it was an execution. Holyfield was a whirlwind of violence, overwhelming Parkey with a multi-punch assault that left the champion dazed and helpless against the ropes. Forcing a third-round stoppage, he now held 2 of the 3 major belts. The final piece of the puzzle was WBC champion Carlos de Leon. In a masterclass of precision punching and aggressive ring generalship, Holyfield picked de Leon apart, forcing a stoppage in the 8th round. The mission was complete. Evander Holyfield stood alone as the first undisputed cruiserweight champion in history. His fame was now international and his marketability exploded. He was no longer just a boxer, he was a brand. The ultimate symbol of his arrival in mainstream pop culture was the release of Evander Holyfield's Real Deal Boxing for the Sega Genesis, a video game that cemented his status as a household name. But for Holyfield, the cruiserweight division was merely a stepping stone. The real glory, the real money, and the real legacy resided in the heavyweight division. The move up was met with widespread skepticism. Critics said he was too small, that his punches wouldn't carry the same weight, that he would be bullied by the giants of the sport. His heavyweight debut was against James "Quick" Tillis, a durable veteran who had once gone the distance with a young Mike Tyson. Holyfield answered every question emphatically, dismantling Tillis before stopping him in the 5th round. He followed this with a brutal beatdown of Pinklin Thomas, who quit on his stool, unable to withstand the punishment. But the true test came against former WBA champion Michael Dokes. Dokes was a powerful, menacing figure who openly stated he would squash the little cruiserweight. What followed was one of the most thrilling and violent heavyweight fights of the era. Both men traded hellacious shots in the 1st round, with Holyfield getting rocked early, but he showed the heart of a lion, firing back and slowly breaking Dokes down in a savage war of attrition, finally knocking him out cold in the 10th round in a spectacular fashion that left no doubt about his power. The entire boxing world now knew that Evander Holyfield was for real, and the entire boxing world was waiting for one fight. And one fight only, Holyfield versus Mike Tyson. The collision course was set. The two were on a path to meet in what was being billed as the richest fight in history. But then, on February 11, 1990, in one of the most stunning upsets in sports history, the landscape shattered. In Tokyo, Japan, a 42-1 underdog named James Buster Douglas knocked out the seemingly invincible Mike Tyson. The super fight was dead. Holyfield, ever the professional, didn't sulk. He took on another undefeated co-artist, Alex Stewart, and demolished him in 8 one-sided rounds, with Tyson temporarily dethroned. Holyfield was now the mandatory challenger for Douglas's titles. The fight was set for October 25, 1990. Douglas, still seemingly celebrating his monumental victory over Tyson, showed up overweight and unprepared. Holyfield was a man on a mission. In the third round, he connected with a devastating right hand that sent the champion stumbling across the ring. Holyfield pounced, unleashing a blistering combination that sent Douglas to the canvas for the first time in the fight. Douglas rose but was met with another furious assault, culminating in a final right hand that ended the contest. Evander Holyfield, the boy from the Bowen Homes projects, was now the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. The city of Atlanta threw him a hero's welcome, a massive parade with screaming fans. He was the king of the world, and the endorsements flooded in. He was in commercials for Burger King, Coca-Cola, and Miller Lite, his face beaming from television sets across America. His first title defense was against the ageless wonder, 42-year-old George Foreman. Dismissed by pundits as a farce, the fight turned into a compelling drama. Foreman, using his immense size and still lethal power, walked through Holyfield's best shots and kept coming forward, landing thudding blows of his own. For 12 rounds, Holyfield boxed, moved, and piled up points, but Foreman never stopped coming, proving his incredible toughness and nearly pulling off one of the greatest upsets in history. Holyfield won a unanimous decision, but Foreman won the respect of the world. Next came a young, massive Olympic silver medalist named Riddick Bowe. In their first epic battle, Bowe's size and a surprising game plan proved too much, and Holyfield lost a close decision, surrendering his titles. The rematch was even more dramatic, famously interrupted when a parachutist landed in the ring mid-fight, causing a 20-minute delay. When the action resumed, Holyfield boxed masterfully, dropping Bowe with a spectacular punch and reclaiming his heavyweight crown in one of the greatest fights of the 1990s. Then, in a fight against Michael Moorer, Holyfield suffered a secret, silent catastrophe. He lost a decision, but something was terribly wrong. He had felt weak and sluggish throughout the bout. Later, it was revealed he had fought with a life-threatening condition, a stiff heart that prevented it from pumping properly, causing fluid to build up in his lungs. He had, in essence, suffered a heart attack in the ring. Doctors diagnosed him with a rare cardiac condition and told him his career was over. But Holyfield, displaying the same indomitable will that defined him, underwent rigorous treatment and, against all medical advice, returned to the ring. And finally, the stars aligned. Mike Tyson had returned from prison and recaptured a version of his former ferocity. The fight that was 5 years in the making was signed. On November 9, 1996, Holyfield was a 25-1 underdog. Tyson and the world expected a quick knockout, but from the opening bell, Holyfield was the aggressor. He bullied the bully, smothering Tyson's attacks, tying him up, and firing back with brutal combinations. In the 6th round, he hurt Tyson badly and finished him, scoring one of the most monumental upsets in boxing history. The world was in shock. The rematch 7 months later descended into infamy. Frustrated and outclassed again, Tyson snapped in the 3rd round, biting off a piece of Holyfield's ear. After a second bite in the ensuing chaos, Tyson was disqualified. The bite fight became a global scandal. Holyfield was now a 3-time heavyweight champion, but his final chapter at the top was mired in controversy. He fought Lennox Lewis for the undisputed crown in 1999 after 12 rounds where Lewis clearly dominated. The fight was scandalously scored a draw, a decision universally panned as one of the worst robberies in boxing history. In the immediate rematch, Lewis left no doubt, outboxing Holyfield over 12 clear rounds to claim the title. The era of Evander Holyfield as the dominant heavyweight was over, and as his in-ring career waned, the financial house of cards he had built began to collapse. The $230 minus one in career earnings had been systematically drained by a perfect storm of excess and exploitation. He lived like an emperor, building a 54,000 square foot mansion on 235 acres, which he named Holyfield, complete with 109 rooms, a bowling alley, and a movie theater. He owned a fleet of luxury cars. Most devastatingly, he had 11 children with 6 different women, leading to immense monthly child support payments. He trusted the wrong people with his investments, pouring millions into failed business ventures and a music production company that never turned a profit. He was notoriously generous to a fault, supporting a massive entourage. By 2008, the money was gone. He was $14 million in debt. The IRS placed a $500,000 lien on his property. In 2012, his iconic Promised Land mansion was foreclosed on and sold at auction for $7.5 million, a fraction of the $20 million he had spent to build it. He was forced to sell his Olympic bronze medal at auction for financial relief. He continued to fight into his late 40s, a sad spectacle of a once great champion chasing paychecks to stay afloat. His name now synonymous with financial ruin. Evander the Real Deal Holyfield's story is the ultimate boxing tragedy. He possessed one of the greatest hearts in the history of sports, a will that allowed him to overcome Olympic robbery, cardiac arrest, and the ferocity of Mike Tyson, yet that same trusting and relentless nature left him defenseless against the predators outside the ring. He conquered every man who stood across from him in the squared circle, but he was ultimately defeated by the vultures in suits, the trappings of fame, and the cost of his own generosity. The champion who earned $250 million now lives a quiet, scaled-back life, a permanent testament to the fact that in the fight of life, a strong chin and a lion's heart are sometimes not enough. So, what are we left with when the final bell rings on Evander Holyfield's epic story? A legacy forever defined by its heartbreaking paradox. Here was a man with one of the greatest, most unbreakable hearts in the history of sports, a will that allowed him to conquer Olympic injustice, survive a literal heart attack in the ring, and stare down the ferocity of Mike Tyson not once but twice. He was a warrior who feared no man and no challenge. Yet, that same trusting, relentless spirit that made him a king in the ring was his ultimate vulnerability outside of it. He conquered every single opponent who stood across from him in the squared circle, but he was defenseless against the predators in suits, the trappings of his own immense fame, and the staggering cost of his own generosity. The man who earned $250 million, who reached the absolute pinnacle of global sports, was ultimately defeated not by a fighter's fists, but by a mountain of debt, betrayal, and excess. His story is the ultimate cautionary tale, proving that in the brutal fight of life, a strong chin and a lion's heart are sometimes not enough to protect you. He was the champion who had it all and lost it all. If this deep dive into the rise and tragic fall of a boxing legend surprised you, or if you have your own thoughts on who was truly to blame for his financial ruin, I want to hear about it. Let me know in the comments below what was the most shocking moment in Evander Holyfield's story for you. And if you're hooked on uncovering the shocking, untold truths behind the world's greatest athletes and their darkest struggles, you need to check out my Patreon. That's where the real deep dives happen. I release exclusive series like Legends and Losses and Fallen Idols every single week, content you won't find anywhere else. The link is waiting for you in the description. Below, go subscribe and join our inner circle. Thanks for watching. Stay curious and remember, the toughest fights often happen outside the ring. Cheers.